G'day everyone. Thought I'd take you through today the menu or the setup guide to using the a6400. So I'll show you how I've done the initial setup and also show you how I've set my menus up. Now, look, I've only just started doing it, so there may be still changes with this, and later on I'll upgrade that if I do change anything to sort of let you know what I've changed. So I thought we'd go through that together. Obviously then, if you have anything that you're not sure about, you can leave that down below. The menus sometimes are so complex, if I get something wrong anyway, you can put that down below as well, because we'll all learn together from that as well. Because there's so many menus in here that you just don't use, and that can be one of the issues as well. Like I said, I'm certainly no expert in this regard. I'm just showing you how I've set mine up, and so you can see if you'd like to set yours up the same way. So let's go over, oh, by the way too, some things won't work due to the fact that I'm on HDMI as well. And it won't show up things like focus peaking, for instance. But let's go anyway and have a look through this. So the start is, we're going up to the top left-hand corner. You'll see that it's quality image size settings, and when we're on the sort of red camera icon on the top left-hand corner up there. So format here, you can change this to RAW plus JPEG, and also JPEG settings as well. I'm just going to leave this on JPEG to show you how you can do some other things like the clear image zoom, but I'll leave it on JPEG. Plus, at the moment, I don't think Lightroom will import the a6400 due to it won't have the RAW reader at the moment. So I'm leaving it on JPEG for the moment, but usually I'll leave it on JPEG. If I've got a dual card slot camera, I would have RAW plus JPEG, RAW on one and JPEG on the other card. But at the moment, I'm just going to leave it on JPEG. JPEG quality, I do like the maximum one that you can actually get there, which is extra fine. Obviously, if you'd like to make it a bit more compressed, you can have fine or standard. I always like the maximum quality I can get. That's the same reason why here I'll leave it on 24 megapixel, so it's the largest the largest JPEG file that you can get. You've also got 12 megapixel and 6 megapixel there as well. Aspect ratio is interesting because they've added a 1:1, which is for, say, Instagram. So if you're shooting Instagram all the time, you could leave this 1:1, and that's how you're going to see it in the frame, which is quite interesting, and that's good that they did that. The 16:9 format is for movies. That's great if you're doing stills into movies and things like that, or you just like that wide aspect look and you're not printing it, for instance. The 3:2 is your normal ratio, which is your printing ratio. Panoramic size will change on here. If I turned it to Pano, there'll be a couple of options that you'll get through here. So I'll switch that over to Pano, and you'll see when I do it that they'll become available. Now, Pano size, you've got standard and you've also got wide. So you can have a very wide one or just a standard one. It just depends how wide you'd like the image to actually look. The Pano direction, it just depends on which way you'd like to go when it starts. Would you like to, say, start from the right and then left, and then move right, move left, up and down? You can totally set that depending on which way you go. I like to move just right with it, so I've left that standard. Let me put this back over to manual exposure. The next page is long exposure noise reduction and high ISO noise reduction I have off. I don't like any processing being done on the files at all. I like to do that in software. Actually, if you're shooting JPEG though, it's not a bad idea to leave them on, because the camera results are pretty good. So if I was going to leave this in JPEG, I'd probably leave both of those on, because it's more of a finished baked in file right from the beginning. But if you're doing RAW, you'd have those off due to the fact that you're going to do all of that noise reduction and things like that in Lightroom or whatever program you're using. Color space is sRGB. My printer likes sRGB, so I leave that on. Most of the printers do. If you're doing your own printing, or you just want to view these on screen, Adobe RGB is a much wider gamut, so that's what you can use if you're dealing with that. My workflow is sRGB, so I leave it on sRGB. Lens compensation, I never use. Auto mode is if you're shooting things in the auto mode on the camera. And I never go in there, so I'm not even going to talk about these top 3 settings, because I never use the auto shooting. I think it'll actually choose the image that is best and things like that when you're doing your continuous shooting. You can have those sort of settings in there. You can also choose your scene that you want to use for your auto settings as well. But like I said, I'm not using it, so I'm not going to go through that mode. Drive mode is where you choose your single, shooting, whether you want to go high, mid, low, or high plus in the menu there. That's your timer and things like that, and you've got bracket timers and things like that. I'm not really going to go through this at this stage because I might talk about this in another video at another time. Again, with bracket settings, you can actually have self-timer during your brackets, what your exposure compensation will be between them, things like that. So that's how you'll do those settings. Interval shooting is how you do your time lapse. You can turn it on here, obviously, and then your start time in seconds, what's your shooting interval, number of shots that you require, and the AE tracking sensitivity as well, and it'll tell you how long that will go through. At the moment on those settings, it's going to go for 1 minute and 27 seconds. These recall and memory that you can set, basically it will bring something up. Now, to explain how that works, you could have, say, one memory setting for 4K, 24p, and then you might have another memory that you'd like to call that has 1080p at 60p, or 1080 60p, so that you can slow that down. You may also want to do a 1080 120, and you can, say, recall all those features, and you can also set in there things like what exposure mode you'd like to be using, what shutter speed and ISO you'd like to have as a starting point, and just recalling that memory up will bring all those settings back. So it's very, very handy if you're using two different things all the time. Like I often am with shooting 4K, but then I might want to do some slow motion, so I could quickly just recall that memory and have that setting come up, the 1080 60p. Custom shooting down the bottom here is quite interesting because what you can do with this is you can program a button to set whatever you'd like from the camera, and it really is quite extensive. What you do is you can use one of your custom keys, and when you press that, you can change the total camera, the way it's operating. So say, for instance, you're in a church and you're dealing with very dark conditions, and say you've set that all manual and things like that, with certain drive modes or exposure compensation or whatever. Well, then if you have to quickly run outside the church and that's a bright sunny day, well, you could have a setting done that, say, gets you into program auto or whatever, or aperture mode. You might have gone from manual before. Now you can run out and just be aperture mode, so all you have to change is the compensation. You could change what your ISO setting was. All these sort of things can all be done from this custom recall button, which is very, very handy to actually have. You can see here that there's lots and lots of different things that you can actually set and change. It's quite good, and it's really handy sometimes to shoot with that. The other thing too is, if we continue on, focus mode is on continuous. You've also got AFS, obviously, for something static. AFA will choose between AFS and AFC. You've got DMF mode. I'm going to explain more about these in another video. I did do one earlier, but I'll probably do another one for this camera again, because there's certain other things that have been added on this camera. Priority set in AFS, I always leave this in balanced emphasis because it chooses a balance between getting focus and also release when you use your shutter button. So I just leave it balanced, and it sort of chooses the best time to do your shot. So I always do that, and I leave in the same in AFC. I'll always leave it on balance emphasis. If you want to make sure that it's just on AF, you could choose AF if you wanted to. I like to just choose balanced emphasis. Focus area is where you choose your wide. Again, I'm going to do another video about this because you've got now tracking expanded, flexible spot added and things like that. So I will do another video about this eventually. Focus area limit. You can limit the area where your focus can be done on a part of the screen. So for instance, if you wanted to just have the right hand side at a certain spot, that's how you can set that focus limit area. You'll see, oh no, sorry, I've done that wrong. I need to go back over that. Focus area limit stops your these menu items from showing up in the menu. For instance, when you go into here, if I click onto this menu item there, you'll see that it starts to show all of them up like that. Well, if you never ever use a flexible spot at all, manual, what you can do is you can go into this setting and you can turn that off. All right, so you could turn that one off completely, and then that won't show up in the menu. So it's a great way of, for instance, if you only use 3 of them, you could just keep the 3 there, and then you wouldn't have to be scrolling through all of these different menus. Switch VF AF area. Let's changes the it's meant to keep the focus point the same when you go from vertical to horizontal. I probably should play around with that and just see what it actually does. I never use it, but I believe if you set it on, it's meant to have that same focus point or maintain that focus point when you go to vertical. AF illuminator is on auto. I like that to be showing. Face IAF set. You can have face priority is on. If you don't want the face priority to be there and you want to use something else, because that can cause problems sometimes, you can turn it off. You can also have right, left eye select. Now I've got it on auto, so it'll choose the one at once. You can also, if you like, to go to left and right as well. I've also got the C1 button program to switch that, so it will change it. Face detect frame display will show the frame around the face. I've got that as on. AF with shutter is off because I'm using back button shutter or focus. So what that does, it stops you getting focus with your normal shutter button that's there. So I've turned that off because I'm using the AEL button at the back to get focus. So that's switched off. You don't really need to do that as much with this camera because it grabs IAF and everything so well and tracking. I just like everything to be consistent, and I just use back button focus. Pre-AF, I always leave that off because that causes some issues with pre-focusing. So I like to leave that off. AF area registration, you can choose an area of the screen that you'd like to be registered, so every time you turn that on, that will be the part that the focus point will come on. For instance, if you wanted the top right hand screen, you could do that. Delete, you can delete that registered AF area, and you can say auto clear the AF area as well. Okay, so display continuous AF area. This actually lets you display the area that is in focus when it's set to wide or zone or in continuous focus mode. So it'll actually display those focus areas. Circle of focus point. What that does is quite interesting. I used to have this in my Nikon days where when the focus point gets to the left-hand side, if you keep it pressed over, it will basically come to the left-hand side. So it'll go to the right of the screen, then continue from left to right all the time, and it's very, very handy. So it's like it's circulating or doing a circle through your focus through the screen. AF micro adjust I never use because I never have to adjust my lenses. Exposure compensation is not available because I'm on not on the aperture mode at the moment, but you can adjust your exposure compensation through there. ISO settings as well, that you can change everything through here. This is just how I've set mine up at the moment. If I wanted to, I'm on ISO 200 at this moment, but the ISO range limit is quite handy because that you can set what the limit of your ISO will be. I do usually leave it at the lowest, which is 100, and then I've sort of found doing a guide from what it used to be in the other a6500 that 64 tends to be the upper limit before we get too much noise. I'll have to do some tests with this camera to see what I'm happy with. But if you go into auto ISO and you're using this, it'll use between 100 and then it will stop at 6400, so they're quite handy. ISO auto minimum, you can actually set in there whether you'd like to be faster, slower, or fastest. What that really means is that you can set it so that it for instance, if you wanted to make sure that you were doubling your lens focal length, you can change the settings on that so you will get either a faster shutter speed or a slower shutter speed. I'll have to do some tests on that to see how that works. Often I use faster or fastest on that though, and I haven't changed that yet. Let me go here. Metering mode is obviously where you set your metering mode. You've got multiple ones that you can set. I usually use multi, but if you wanted to choose spot, which can be quite handy if you wanted to just adjust your exposure on, say, skin tones, particularly for video and stuff like that. If you wanted to use the correct IRE, you could use a spot. You can also use this if you wanted to, say, protect some highlights, and I often use that on brides' dresses and things like that. So what that will do, it will meter for the whites on the image and protect the highlights. So that's also quite an interesting one. That will be a video that I'll do eventually for you guys. Face priority and multi-metering is on. I like to expose for the face or meter for the face. Spot metering point, there's center. It just depends on where you'd like to meter. Exposure step, I like 0.3 EV. There is, I think it's 0.5. I like to put 0.3. I like to have more control over using exposure steps. AEL with shutter, that's on. Now that's what I turn on to get back button focus. So I'm using the AEL button at the back, and when you press it on, that gives you your focus. Exposure standard adjust, I've never had to touch that, so I'm leaving it. Flash mode, this is where you determine all your flash modes that you're using, whether you want slow sync, etc. Things like that. So that's where you'll usually, you can say have rear sync or slow sync. Flash compensation, you can adjust your compensation through here of your onboard flash or your inbuilt flash. Now, exposure compensation or flash exposure compensation here, this works with ambient and flash. I usually leave it on that so it balances between the ambient and your flash. If you were critical and you wanted to main your ambient, you can actually adjust that so it will only affect the ambient exposure. So there's two different settings there. I usually use ambient and flash. If you only want to affect the ambient, you can put that onto ambient. Wireless flash is not available. If I stuck a flash in the hot shoe, it would become available, and then I could turn that wireless flash on to get off-camera flash and stuff like that done. Red eye reduction, I leave turned off. I don't like that. White balance, again, you've got all the controls through here. I'll do a talk about this one day, a video. There's multiple settings that you can see you can change. Obviously, if you're using a flash, you can turn flash on. You can also put Kelvin in if you'd like to change that to get a different look. You can see there it goes warmer the higher the number is. 5,500 is your daylight Kelvin. You can also do custom white balances as well and things like that. I'll do a discussion on this one day or a video. Priority set and auto white balance is interesting because if you're using auto white balance, and sometimes I do if I'm wanting to work quick, you can have standard, but you can also click on ambi. Now what this means is it'll do a white balance but keep the ambience that you're in. So for instance, if you're in a location where you had that lovely light that's showing through there and you wanted to keep the warm ambient through the room, you could have ambient, that setting there, the AWB ambi. If you wanted to try and force it to go towards your white balance or white auto balance or your 50% grey, well then you click on that one and it will try and neutralize the image. Auto white balance tries to sort of get a balance between all of them. So that's quite handy to have, particularly if you want to set, keep your white balance as it is in the room. DRO, auto HDR, I'll leave off. It's just a setting that I never use. It's just dynamic range. It will give you more dynamic range, but I like to just expose correctly and control it later on. Creative style is where you can bring in your settings for video and JPEGs. You can add contrast, sharpness, and saturation, so you can change those. I've still got to do some testing with this to see how it goes, but I usually leave all these things dead standard. It's just the way that I work and I don't change any of these settings. I know a lot of people will change like sharpness down and they may even drop saturation down a little bit as well to get a more cinematic look. Picture effect I never use because they're the kiddie type things that you can bring up. I never use those settings at all. But they're there if you want to go in and have a play around with them. Picture profiles, I tend to just use the standard profile, so normally it's off for me, but I will have to do some testing. Sometimes I will use log and stuff if it's a really high dynamic range image. But basically all you'll do is you'll go into here and you check into the gamma, and then you can change all your gammas and stuff like that to S-log, like you're looking at HLG there. If you go to S-log 3, you can see that that's really flat. S-log 2 is less flat. Sine 4, which is what I often use actually. But, you know, they're settings that I'll still have to play around with and probably eventually do a movie like that to show you how that works. But like I said, usually I'm keeping that dead standard unless you need some really high dynamic range image. Skin soft effect I never use, so it's just off. Shutter with AWB lock means there's two settings in there. I believe if you have shutter, there's three settings, you can have it off. I like this because it locks the auto white balance down when you half press the shutter down. Therefore, when you start taking shots, the auto white balance won't change between shots. You can also do that with continuous shooting. If it's on continuous shooting, it will only affect it when you're on continuous shooting. So as long as you're continuously shooting, the auto white balance is locked from the first one that you take off. But I like to control that, so I leave the auto white balance there. I suppose if your lighting was changing continuously in a room, you may want to turn that off, obviously. Focus magnifying time is no limit, and I've got the initial focusing of 1, and AF focus magnification is also on. Now, what this all means is that when you go to manual focusing, that it will blow up the image, and so you can manually focus and do something accurate. Focus peaking I'm not going to be able to show you because it won't work through HDMI. That's what this manual focus assist actually means. But let me show you how this actually works. So if I go to the FM menu and go to manual focus, oops. Now you'll see as I go, I'm just going to go over here. As I say bring this up, notice how now it zooms in, and then I can get critical focus. Now if I want to go again, I can just click again and then it will really zoom in. Now I can just use your little wheel on the back of the camera and get critical focus, and then when you click again, that will be in focus. So that's what that means to get that AF, that magnification zoom. Let me take that back and I'll go back to AFC. So what that means in there is that the initial focus magnification is up to 1. You can jump to that larger one if you like. I've just left it on at 1 times, and then I can just press the center button on your wheel, and then that will zoom it in even more. Like I said, focus peaking I can't show you, but that can be handy if you're manually focusing as well. You can turn that on, and then you can also have peaking level of mid, high and low. So high is very, very strong, so to be really bright and contrasty. Low is very minimal. You can also change your focus peaking color as well. So you can go from red, yellow, blue and white. For instance, if you're looking at me with a red top on, you wouldn't want to use red as your focus peaking because you wouldn't see it. So you could go yellow, blue or white. So it's quite handy to be able to change that. Face registration, you can register faces. You just go into here, new registered faces, and they come in order. And when you do it, I do that with brides all the time. I'll register her as number 1, and then the groom will be number 2. You can change the order around if you want to. You can also, by using this order exchanging, you can delete after the shoot and then delete all. Face registration is very, very handy. It's one way of being able to pick out a bride over everyone else. It will look for that face, and it works very, very well. Register face priority obviously will be on, so it looks for registered faces. Smile shutter I've never used, so I'll leave it off. It's meant to be that if you smile it will take a photo. Auto object framing, that's, I believe it crops. If you're using your tracking, it will crop the image down for the, if you were doing say a person, it will crop the image down to grab say a face or whatever and crop the rest of the image off when you're in the auto mode. I leave it off because I never use that, so it's not relative to what I'd use. Self-portrait timer, I like that on because that will show the timer coming up on the camera. File format, this is where obviously you change your format that you've got in your camera. You can go 4K HD. So record setting, this is where you change your frame rate and everything else, so you can determine whether what you'd like to actually shoot with. If you went, say for instance, to a HD, you'd have a lot more, to just your 1080p, you'd have a lot more settings. S&Q settings can be done through here as well. I'm not going to go through that now. That'll be another video some other time. Proxy recording, you can make proxies when you're doing recordings, so it does a low resolution version of that later on, and then you can go into your say Final Cut or Premiere and grab the low res proxies, and they can be linked back later on. AF drive speed in here, this is where you can set for normal, fast or slow. This determines whether you'd like to, how fast you'd like your tracking to actually, your drive speed to be. If you're dealing with normal drive speeds, it'll sort of be between the two, but if you want to say have it move very, very fast with something moving quick like sports and things like that, you could have it on fast. If you would say, or if you wanted say to track cars and stuff like that, if you wanted to do something that was moving very, very slow, you could have it on slow. So you can change these, and like say for instance you were tracking football, you'd want to move it onto fast. It just depends really on what you're shooting. I might do a video about that at one time. AF tracking sensitivity here, depends whether you'd like it to move really, really fast or really slow. I like to tend to keep it on standard. I've found that responsive can sometimes make a little bit of shuttering, like you'd see the lights flickering and stuff in the background, so I tend to leave it on just standard. Auto slow shutter will slow you if you leave it on. If you go into a dark location and you're on auto exposure, it will reduce your shutter speed down. I don't like to do that because I like to be in control. Initial focus magnification, I just leave it 1. And obviously auto recording I have as on because I want to record the audio. Audio recording level is grayed out at the moment because I'm actually connected to HDMI. Audio level display will show the display on the screen. Audio noise reduction is off. If you have wind that's meant to get rid of that wind, I tend to use, say, a dead cat or something like that I can use to stop that wind noise. Marker display settings, you can actually set different things like your aspect ratio here. If you want to go to different aspect ratios, you can do that through here as well. You can also set things like safety zones, guide frames, etc., showing up where your center is, your center point and stuff like that, and that's under marker settings. Movie with shutter button. If you want to start movies with the shutter button, you can press that. Have that on, and then when you press the your normal shutter button, it will start recording the movie. Silent shooting, that's how you turn silent shooting on and off. Electronic front curtain shutter is on at the moment, but if you're using flash and you're getting banding that starts to come up, you can turn that off if you're over 1,000th of a second. They advise you to turn that off because you can get some issues. Release without lens, I leave that on because I like to be able to use it without the lens on if I want to do some lens stuff where you, I can't remember the name of it, where you move the lens, not actually on the camera, someone will remind me, and you just move that around and you can get some funky sort of looks. So I leave that off. Or enabled. Release without card I disable because I don't want the camera to work if there's no card in there. Steady shot is also not available because I'm using a lens that doesn't have steady shot on it. Zoom is basically you can zoom your image in like that. Now I like this because it's got clear image zoom. Now what that means is that if I press the center button I can zoom in. So it's like really having a telephoto lens. Now, even though this is the 24 1.8, you can zoom up to 2 times, and the quality is quite good if you're dealing with movies or just shooting with JPEG. So it's one of the advantages of doing JPEG, I suppose. It won't work with RAW, so this is quite handy. Particularly good if you're using video because it gives you extra focal lengths. Now, zoom in rotate is if you have a zoom lens like the Sony 18-105, you can change that zoom ring rotate. You can change the zoom ring on it to do different the opposite way. Display button is how you get to your monitor finder. Finder frame rate I set at high. Zebra setting I leave on and I leave that at 100. Now I've found that that's perfect for shooting videos. The second that I see the zebras disappear, I know that the exposure is set right. You can put grid lines if you like. I don't usually put grids on. Exposure set guide puts this weird exposure setting on inside. I'll show you what it actually does. You'll see it in here. At the moment, if I change my aperture, like I'm on 1.8, you just see that that's all that changes. If I change here and put exposure set guide on, what will happen now is, see how it's showing that now? You can sort of see two things. Now, if you're on other exposures, it shows aperture and also your shutter speed as well. I just don't like to use it. I leave that turned off. I find it just takes up some screen real estate. Live view displays is always a good setting to know about because when it's on, like it is at the moment, if I change settings, for instance, if I change that, you'll see how the screen darkens, so it shows what your setting is. If I change ISO, for instance, you'll see that I see that setting come up. If I turn the live view settings display off, now it won't show. So you have to understand what you're getting because it's not showing on the screen at all. This is great if you're dealing with shooting in very dark locations, because it lets you see what's actually in the room. It also works if you're shooting flash in studio. You have to turn that off. Otherwise, you're shooting in a dark location, you won't be able to see, because it thinks, say for instance, you're shooting at f8, which is often what you'll do, f8 or f9. In the studio, the flash is what lights the subject up. So the screen will show you it's a very dark exposure because it can't compensate for the flash. So that's why you will turn that display setting off. Auto review is if you'd like to have your images shown for 2 seconds, 5 seconds, or 10 seconds. I usually leave it off because I can see it in the viewfinder anyway. Custom keys, this is where you set your custom keys. So this is what my settings basically are at the moment. You'll see that the top one there, when the button is up, is on, it controls your autofocus, manual focus, just by holding that in. I've got the custom button when it's down is just AF on because I'm using back button focus. And number 3, custom button is on white balance. If I go to the next one, you'll see that the center is zoom. That's how I zoomed in using clear image zoom. And also for the zooming when I did the manual focus. Number 2 over there is drive mode. That's standard as it is. Number 3 is on ISO. That's standard as it is. And number 4 is on exposure compensation. So I haven't changed them at all. If we look, and this is what's great about this now, you see the buttons. This is such a good menu update compared to the other one between the a6500. Here on custom button 1, it switches between the right eye and the left eye. And I've got that set at IAF at the moment. It's if you have a zoom lens with a your buttons on them, that could be set to whatever you like. So let me quit out of that. And now again, these are all the same at the moment. I've got them just, if you click in it, it's just saying follow custom, that other button. So if you look in here, it's just saying follow custom key, that one for stills. Function menu set, this is where I've set all of my FM menu, and I've got in here at the moment, which is drive mode there. I've got focus area, there's focus mode, touch operation, so I can turn the touch operation on and off. Metering mode here, I've got flash mode, and I've also got flash compensation there. Picture profiles I've got there, creative styles, audio record level, peak display, that's peaking. I can turn it on and off, or silent shooting. So, you can copy that if you'd like to follow exactly what I've got, but they're the settings that I've used. Now, all of these settings that are actually there, if I quit out of here, this is what happens when I press the menu here. So if I press the FM menu, that's what comes up. So then I can choose my settings there. I can change my drive speed. I can also change my focus area as well. I can touch the touch operation on and off, metering mode, flash mode. So you can see how useful this actually is. Silent shooting there I can bring up if I want to go very, very quiet. Peak, color off. Some aren't available because I'm not doing video at the moment. Audio record level, creative style, picture profile, and flash compensation are all available through that menu. So that's a great menu to have. My dial settings, you can change your dials, your control wheels. I don't touch that, so I never use them. Same as with your dial wheel setup as well. I think you can determine whether you'd like TV AV to be on different buttons. I never touch them. TV AV rotate, I think if you click in here, you can reverse them if you come from a different system. You can also have dial wheel EV compensation, exposure compensation on the wheels if you like. I don't turn that on, but you can choose exposure compensation from that as well. I can't get into there, it's disabled. I'm pretty sure that was where your function of your touch operation was available in there as well. It's because I'm connected via HDMI. Movie button always, I always use the movie button. Dial wheel lock. Now what you can do here, if you have this as unlock and things like that, you can lock your dial wheels if you want to by pressing a key or unlock them. I just leave it, I never touch it. So it is something that you can lock your dial wheels if you want to. Audio signals are always on for me. If you want to turn your audio signals off, so you want a silent camera, you can turn them down. Network and stuff like that, I haven't changed anything, so I'm not really going to discuss all these. This is where you send things to your smartphone and to your computer, etc. You can have airplane mode and Wi-Fi settings, Bluetooth settings, etc. Playback, this is just where you can protect images, rotate your images. You can also do ratings as well, things like that through all the setting. And obviously I've changed nothing. Again, this is where you can do things like enlarge images and stuff like that. This also is, you can control the images that you see from your interval recordings, from your time lapses. This is where you can control that, like the speed and also what images you see. Slideshow, things like that you can display. To be honest, I never go into those menus at all. I can't adjust these because I'm through a monitor, but this is where you can control your monitor brightness, your viewfinder brightness, and also your color temperature as well. Gamma assist is if you're using things like log or HLG, you can turn assistance on. I'll have to talk about this in another video. It's off at the moment, but you can put auto assist on, and you can put things like S-log assistance and things like that, and HLG logs, so that what you see in your viewfinder is correct. Volume settings, you can determine how loud your volume settings are. Tile menu I never use. If you put tile menu on, every time you click out of your menu, it'll go back to the beginning again. I don't like that. I like to leave it where it was previous. Mode dial guide, I don't use that either because I don't need to see what dial I've got at the top. I can see that with the dial just by looking that I'm on N. If you have it on, you'll see a graphical representation of whether you go to A or movie or anything like that. I find it just slows the computer down, or slows the camera down. Delete confirm, you can say confirm if you want to delete it. Display quality I set on high. I always like the display quality of the LCD and EVF to be high. Power startup, safe startup time is 1 minute. Auto power off I set high because I don't want it to turn off. It will come on standard. I like to turn it on to high. You can also determine whether you're NTSC or PAL here. Cleaning mode, if you go there you can do a cleaning if you like to. Touch operation, you can have your touch on and off. Touch panel and pad. I like to have it on touch panel plus the pad. I like full control. Touchpad settings. This is where you can actually do things like set part of the screen. If you're worried about your nose touching it, you could set it so that it's just the upper left or lower left. Depends how you'd like to actually set it. Touch mode, I believe this one is it's on relative because at the moment it sort of moves differently depending on how fast you want to move your finger and stuff like that. I'll leave it on relative. If you do absolute position, it moves very, very quickly and you can sort of just click and it grabs the whole screen differently. I'm not sure. I think that's how it works. I just leave it on relative position and it works for me, so I haven't changed it. I believe absolute position is just very, very fast and I think relative position moves differently depending on how fast and quick you want to move your finger across. I believe that's the case, but someone may correct me on that. Demo mode obviously off. TC, these are all things to do with counters and stuff like that if you want to set for video. I never ever use them, so I don't even know what to explain about that much because I never use it. Remote control, if you have a remote control, you turn that on. HDMI settings, if you have this connected through a HDMI, this is how I'm using now. I've got HDMI info display on. If I turn it off, you won't see it. You'll just see what's coming through the camera and things like that. Record control, if I have that on, I can record from my camera and it will start the recorder on the actual recorder. It'll start recording on that as well. Control for HDMI is if you connect this to, say, a Sony TV, things like that. All USB settings here. Multi means if you're connecting and doing upgrades to your camera, you usually use multi. I believe it cuts off some of the USB features that are there, so it makes it so it's not so complex for when you're doing your upgrades for firmware and things like that, I believe. USB power supply will be on, so you can charge it by USB power supply. PC remote settings is if you are tethering to a computer, you can determine whether you wanted to have the images on the card as well as the computer or just on the computer itself. Language is how you set your language. Date and time setup is how you set your date and time, and the area setting down here will set your area as well. Copyright info, I've stuck all of that in, so this is where you can set your photographer info and you can write that to the actual files. you should do that straight away. Format will format your card. File number, you can have it in series. I've changed it so I know that it's from the a6400. I've just changed it to A64. You can also change things like record folder and things as well. I never change these. Recover image database, if you have a corruption, you can try that. Sometimes it will do it all on its own. And lastly, display media info will give you how many images you can fit on that card, and also show how long you can record to the card as well. Version will tell you what version number of your body is and also your lens is, so you know if you have to do updates. And setting reset will take your camera back to the default state. So that was awfully long, guys. I was struggling going through that at the end. It was really quite long. I hope you enjoyed that. Look, that's only how I've set my camera up. There's a million different ways that you can set this up. There's still a couple of things that I couldn't remember. There's so many things when you go through them. It would have taken forever. But let me know what you think. Let me know if you found that useful. Stay tuned. And obviously, if you have any comments, leave those down below. And I'll see you all again soon for the next video, guys. Bye for now.